Reconstruction in the United States, of course, started in 1865. This is, of course, after the Civil War ended. Reconstruction usually goes, you can see, from 1865. That banner's not supposed to be on there. It goes from 1865 to 1877. So it lasts about 12 years, roughly. And of course, as you know, what caused Reconstruction? Reconstruction, as you know, was caused by, of course, the American Civil War, which lasted about 4 years overall. I think there's got, of course, the slides on there, which are right there. And there are different theories about, how they were going to reconstruct, the United States after the Civil War ended, because the Confederacy, lost the war to the North, Union side. And so there were different theories on how they should reconstruct the United States. I'll kind of go through some of these, theories that they had overall. And I've got some right here. Of course, Abraham Lincoln himself had different ideas. Lincoln had what they call the 10% plan. It's often, I guess, the nickname that they usually dub it, the 10% plan. And let me put that back the way it was. I like that this way. But Lincoln had the 10% plan, and there it is. And anyway, y'all like it this way or this way? I guess it doesn't matter. Y'all can see it anyway. But so Lincoln had the 10% plan, and his idea was that basically for all the states to come back in, they had to hold like a constitutional convention and then hold elections. And then what they would do is that they would have to have at least 10% of the voters in 1860, the 1860 presidential election, take an allegiance to the Union, that they would, uphold the U.S. Constitution and all that before they could actually come back in and have representatives in Congress, etc. Of course, then the other thing you can see there as well is that they then, he was going to offer some pardons to some Confederates, but not the ones that were high up. So Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, who was, I guess, high up in the military, whatever. A lot of those Confederates wouldn't be able to be pardoned, whatever. But that was Lincoln's idea, which came out in he kind of came up with these ideas in 1863. But a lot of the Republicans didn't like it, basically. Then they had this thing called the Wade-Davis Bill, which came out in 1864. And these two guys in Congress named Wade and Davis came up with it. Republicans came up with it predominantly, and included like moderate Republicans and those that were radical Republicans that were in Congress that were totally against Lincoln's plans. They thought Lincoln's plans were too lenient, and it didn't help out like African Americans that were being freed after they banned slavery. And so in 1860, when they would ban slavery, and so in 1864, they came up with this idea, and it was introduced, and it had some provisions in it you may have heard of. Is it in here? No, it's not right there, but I don't know if I have it right here somewhere. I don't have it in there. Looks like it. But they had a part in it that's very famous, which I'll include. I don't know what happened to it. It must have died out on me. But they had a, I don't know what happened there. Oops, something got messed up. What happened there? That's crazy. Let me stop that. And what I did exactly. Something got messed up, I guess. But there was a thing called the Ironclad Oath, which I wanted to mention about. which is very famous, which is part of it. In the Ironclad Oath, what it was that there was a deal where if you wanted to, if you're like a Confederate, well, no, if you're a Southerner, like living in a Southern state, you had to take an oath that you basically had never taken up arms and fought against the North, like the Union side in the war, and then you could have right to vote and hold office. So the radical Republicans and a lot of Republicans wanted to try to basically prevent the ex-Confederates from really holding office or being even able to vote. So that's something they were hoping to do because they thought that what would happen after the Civil War ended, that the white Southern Democrats would come in and they would just take over and they would have all the power. So they were worried about Southerners that were Republican, African Americans that were free, and they wouldn't have rights, and all that. As you see in the thing, Lincoln eventually vetoed it. They call it so-called pocket veto, basically, and so it never became law. The Wade Davis bill. Then there was different theories, that's another thing when you talk about too, which was very interesting about Reconstruction. There were two theories about, you had the presidential side of it. The president, like Lincoln and Johnson, believed that the Civil War had been like a rebellion, like of individuals, and that the Union, couldn't break up, you couldn't secede. There was no legal recognition of the Confederacy, which no country, legally said that they existed as a whole. And then the radical representatives, like the radical Republicans, which were in Congress, had two theories. That the states had committed suicide when they had left the Union. And so when that happened, that meant that they were now just like unorganized territories that had to come in to be readmitted into the Union. And then there was another theory they had too called the conquered provinces theory, and that they were conquered by the North, and that meant that they would have to be forced to be reconstructed using like military reconstruction, military governors that would come in. And that's what they eventually decide, the radical Republicans, that military reconstruction was what was needed. So that was just like the two things that was kind of like kind of a controversy over who should control Reconstruction, the president or Congress. Over time, Congress, of course, takes over and controls it, is what will occur. So Reconstruction begins, the battle. There was actually these two guys named Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner. You may have heard of these two guys. They were, of course, went back to the pre-antebellum, the antebellum period, And I think Charles Sumner was famous for getting beaten by Preston Brooks in Congress. I don't know if you remember that story about that. Charles Sumner was the senator of Massachusetts, and Thaddeus Stevens was a representative of Pennsylvania. And so they had their own goals, you can see there. They wanted to prevent the Confederate leaders from returning to power. The Republican Party, they wanted to keep them in power, not just in the North, but also in the South. And of course, you see they also wanted African Americans to gain political freedom. They wanted to ban slavery. They wanted to give them the right to vote. And so they were worried about what the Democrats were going to do in the South. And so that's why they wanted to take over Reconstruction like I'm talking about. Now, of course, as you know, one of the things that happened that totally, destroyed all that was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln that occurred. And I want to mute your mic there. And yeah, so the assassination of Abraham Lincoln was of course a very famous event in American history. If you know about it, there's been four U.S. presidents that have been assassinated. I don't know if you know what they are, but they're Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy. Of course, the Lincoln and Kennedy assassinations are probably the two most famous. Both were killed by a blown gunman, and at least they think anyway. And of course, Lincoln's famous for being the first president to be assassinated. And if you know about back in those days, there was no Secret Service. They had like guards or Pinkertons that would, guard the president or whatever. And apparently, the guard that was supposed to guard him at Ford's Theater, where he was shot on April 14th, 1865, went off to get a drink of alcohol, like whiskey or something like that. It left it unattended, the door into his balcony where he was. And Ford's Theater, of course, it's a famous theater, which is in Washington, D.C. Now it's a museum. And the man that killed him, as you know, was a man named John Wilkes Booth. I think I've got a picture. Of course, there's a picture of him getting shot. There's a picture of Booth. Booth was a Southerner from Virginia. He was sympathetic to the Confederate cause. However, he never fought for the Confederates. If you know much about Booth, he is famous for being an American actor. In fact, his father and his brother were all actors. They had a family of actors. He, of course, toured, the United States, acting in different plays. And let me see there. Somebody's coming in. And we had Alondra. And hey, Alondra. And anyway, Booth hatched this conspiracy, if you know about this, to try to kidnap Abraham Lincoln. He was going to take Lincoln and bring him to the South, where they were going to use him as a pawn, maybe to end the Civil War in the Confederates' favor. However, what happened, if you know about it, was on April 9th, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant. So the war was pretty much ending at that point. And so Booth decided we're going to kill him. We're going to kill Lincoln and all instead. So Booth had this conspiracy to basically not just kill Lincoln, but kill a bunch of people. They often call it I'll put it here, it's called the Lincoln conspiracy, is what a lot of people dub it as a whole. And it actually involved a group of people that were conspirators that conspired to kill Lincoln, overthrow the government maybe, but also not just kill Lincoln, but they were going to try to kill Andrew Johnson, who was the vice president, William Seward, who was the Secretary of State. They were going to kill as well. So they were going to kill a bunch of people. And we had Morgan. How's it going, Morgan? And anyway, so we're talking about the Lincoln assassination as part of the Reconstruction era. And so there was a woman named Mary Surratt. I'll put her on the board here. And Mary Surratt was involved in a conspiracy. And she had a boarding house in Washington, D.C., and all the conspirators met there to conspire to try to do this. They were going to first kidnap, like I said, Lincoln, and then, of course, murder him, as you know. And I think I've got some other pictures, don't I? Oh, there they are. That's the four main conspirators, of course, that were involved. Of course, Mary Surratt, who you see there on the far left, is, of course, what I'm talking about. Good afternoon, everybody. Those send me little chats. That's good. Anyway, yeah, Mary Surratt, one of them. Of course, you see there. Then on the bottom, you have also another guy. The guy right here is Lewis Powell, also known as Lewis Payne. He had I think two aliases that he went by. And Powell was supposed to go kill William Seward. He actually attempted to kill him on the same day when they tried to kill Lincoln. And I think he stabbed him a couple times and tried to shoot him, but I think his guns didn't go off. He had some little one-shot pistols, and they failed to go off for some reason. The guy on the far right over here is George Azerodt. It's his name. He was supposed to kill Andrew Johnson. And there was no like vice presidential White House at the time. The vice president just stayed in a hotel in Washington, D.C. And so he went over to the hotel to try to see if he could try to kill him. He lost his nerve. And so he sat in the saloon, I think, on the first floor and got drunk. So he failed to do anything. The guy right here is David Harold. He was another conspirator as well. And David Harold helped out Lewis Power Payne to try to find his house so he could kill him. And then also David Harold also helped John Wilkes Booth flee Washington, D.C. into Virginia. So helped guide him to escape, I guess. So all these four conspirators later were put on trial as being co-conspirators and trying to kill Lincoln and others, and they were later hanged. And you can see July 1865 is when they were hanged. And Mary Surratt was considered one of the first women like this that was hanged in American history. We read about that. Now let's get to the meat of things, though, of course, which is, as you know, you probably want to know about the assassination and all that. Well, I told you how, like I said, April 14th, 1865, Lincoln went to view a play in Ford's Theater, which was called Our American Cousin. And so he was with, you can see here, his wife, First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln. Also, there were two other people with him in the box. I don't know if you know about this, but the other two was, I think it was Henry Rathbone, who was some kind of major in the American Army, Union Army. And then, yeah, I don't think it was his wife. I believe it was like a woman he was courting who was named, what was her name? I just looked at it a second ago. Clara Harris was her name. Fiance. That's basically it. So the guard wasn't there. And so Booth just basically crept into the box where they were watching the play. And Booth was armed with a Derringer one-shot pistol and a dagger. And so he crept up behind Lincoln. You can see he shot him in the back of the head, point blank almost. Of course, everybody screamed when that happened. And then the guy over here, Henry Rathbone, tried to stop him. And Booth stabbed him with his dagger. And he tried to jump over. If you know, he jumped over the balcony onto the stage, and he caught his leg. And he ended up breaking his leg, like his shin bone, I believe, he broke. And there's a story you've probably heard about Booth. Booth was supposedly said something, before he left Ford's Theater. He said something like "Sic semper tyrannis." I can probably write it down for you if you want. Yeah, six. I'll try to write it down for you, but "Sic semper tyrannis." Where is it? Somewhere in here. Oh, there it is, right there. And that, of course, is the motto of Virginia. Let me write it in there for you. Of course, there's a debate about that, about whether he said that or not. Some people think he may have said something else, like "the South shall be revenged" or something like that, before he ran off. And there was a guy outside that was helping him. His name was either Edward or Edmund Spangler. I don't know if you know about him as well. He was the guy that was holding Booth's horse, like as he went into the actual Ford's Theater. It's either Edward or Edmund. basically. He was like a stagehand at Ford's Theater. And he later got implicated in it too as a conspirator. They don't know if I don't think he knew what was going on, but he got several years for it in prison for holding his horse, basically. Then Booth with David Harold then basically got together and they basically rode into Virginia after that. Lincoln was not dead, though. Lincoln, of course, was brought across the street to a house that was there where he died in the morning about, I think it was 7:22 a.m. He died on April 15th, 1865. So that's really the assassination date. It's really April 15th, the day after Good Friday, too. And because of that, Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, becomes president, 17th president, of course, of the United States. Now, what happened to Booth? Well, Booth then fled, like I said, into Virginia. And he fled into Virginia with David Harold. If you know what happened, Booth then went to this man's house. I'll put it up here on the board for you. Dr. Samuel Mudd. David Harold knew him, and they think Booth may have known Dr. Samuel Mudd as well. And Mudd basically helped Booth with his broken leg, like set it basically, so he could, I guess, go on his way. And Mudd later got implicated too as a conspirator. It's a lot of big debate about whether Dr. Mudd was really involved. They're not sure about that. So they think he may have been innocent. They think he knew Booth, or Harold knew Booth maybe, but they don't think Mudd was really behind it. But he got several years in prison for it. And Mudd became famous for a statement he said, or sometimes would say, or you may have heard of the statement, which is, "My name is Mudd." Believe it or not, my name is Mudd. Anyway, I love that. But anyway, so yeah, and so they were all eventually hanged later for that. Of course, what happened, and there's Samuel Mudd right there, a picture of him right there. He's received a pardon from Andrew Johnson, 1869. I think he was sent to Florida, some prison down there, and he helped victims of malaria because he was a doctor, and so because of that, he was released early. They think. What happened to Booth? Well, Booth eventually ends up in this place. I'll write it on here, but he's eventually killed, like Booth is. He's killed at eventually a place called Bowling Green, Virginia. He and I'm going to spell something right here for you, but he and David Harold were hiding out in a barn on a tobacco farm owned by a family called the Garrett family. And eventually some U.S. Army soldiers eventually found them, basically, where they were hiding out. And when they were asked to surrender, David Harold came out. He surrendered. Booth refused to surrender. And so what they did was they set the barn on fire, try to get him out. And there was a soldier named, I think I've got a picture of him, I believe, that I added. His name is, where is he? Boston Corbett. Yeah, Boston Corbett. Let me write that one on the screen for you. Oops, got messed up. I hate when it does that. Stop sharing for some reason. But his name was Boston Corbett. Hold on a second. There's a problem with the thing in there. It's tricky navigating this thing. But there he is. Um, Boston Corbett was his name. He was a sergeant, I believe. I'll put it on the screen for you so you can see it. Sometimes typing's bad. I think that's how you spell it. Might be spelled wrong, but yeah, Boston Corbett. And he snuck around, found Booth, and shot him, I think, through the wall or whatever, and shot him in the neck. It hit Booth in the neck, basically. And they later dragged Booth out and dragged him to, I think, the front porch of the house that was nearby. And they say that John Wilkes Booth's last words were useless. He looked at his hands or something. He went, useless, useless. And he died. And of course, there's a lot of mysteries about John Wilkes Booth. I don't know if you heard the story about this, but they found a diary on him. And in the diary, there was a lot of pages torn out. And so there's a lot of mystery about what was written in the diary, and they have no idea. So kind of wonder if there was more to the conspiracy than what it was, or it was just a harebrained, crazy idea of, this man Booth. They don't really know. So anyway, that's the story of John Wilkes Booth, of course, and the assassination of, of what is Lincoln. Oh, I do have some humorous stuff to show, which is kind of funny. But I don't know if you heard the stories about this before, but they oftentimes do compare a lot for some weird, there's a lot of coincidences between the Lincoln assassination and the JFK assassination. Both the wives were present when they were killed. So yeah, that's kind of weird. John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald born in 1939. Both sides were known by three names. Both were settlers with unpopular ideas, and each name contained 15 letters. Weird. Booth shot Lincoln in a theater and hid in a warehouse or farm. Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and hid in a theater. Booth and Oswald were murdered before a trial could be arranged. And both Lincoln and JFK were succeeded by Southern Democrats. Very strange. Oh, some further jokes I sometimes used to talk about. Before Lincoln got assassinated, Lincoln was in Maryland. And before JFK was assassinated, he was with Maryland, as in Marilyn Monroe. What was the other one they used to joke about? Lincoln was killed in Ford's Theater. JFK was killed in a Lincoln Continental. So I think there was a deal where also Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, and Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. It's really bizarre stuff, Seems coincidental the way it is. But those two assassinations are really the two most famous. And I guess when we get to the 1960s, we'll talk about the JFK assassination as well. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. So there's Boston Corbett. And let me go ahead and, of course, review what we've already done already at this point. Study guide review, we've talked about already a few things. Today, we've talked about, the different different Reconstruction plans that were out there. Lincoln had his 10% plan, where they were supposed to give amnesty to people in the South, except those, I guess, at the top, basically. And then the 10% plan, was a deal. I told you where basically those in 1860 election, 10% of the male population that voted could take an oath and the state could return to the Union. Of course, eventually they're going to have to ban slavery, which they will later. And the radical Republicans and the Republicans, moderates, to have their own ideas. Like I told you about Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens, who are behind all this. They came up with a Wade Davis bill, which was more restrictive against the South overall. They wanted to prevent the Southern Democrats from holding office or being able to vote. And so they came up with the ironclad oath, if you remember correctly. And the ironclad oath was an oath where you had to take this oath that you had never taken up arms against the Union, like in the South. So that would take out a lot of Southern Democrats because they had fought for the Confederacy and all that. Now, I think I told you about the two different theories about why the Civil War needed to be like the southern states need to be reconstructed. The conquered provinces theory. I think I told you about that one that they had, and then the other one was that they were. What was the other one I had? I think I told you the two theories: conquered provinces, and then they had the state suicide thing. They committed suicide, and so that was the big difference between the radical Republicans and, of course, what the presidents Lincoln and Johnson wanted to do, which was to control it over the Congress. Now, we just talked about Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Of course, you can see he was shot on April 14th, 1865. Forrest Theater died the next day. And, of course, Andrew Johnson became president. John Wilkes Booth, of course, was the assassin that killed Lincoln. And there were conspirators involved, like we talked about. And four of them were hanged. As you know, again, Mary Surratt, Lewis Payne or Powell, George Azerodt, and David Harold. And of course, Booth himself was killed eventually by U.S. Army troops. So it's kind of a quick review there about that. We do have a few minutes left. Let me go ahead and move on. And let me also talk about Andrew Johnson, who became president. You know, he was the 17th president of the United States, who came into power in 1865. I do have some slides on him as well. Andrew Johnson was controversial because he was a Southern Democrat who took over the White House. And of course, the Republicans have been controlling the presidency since 1861. And Johnson had similar Reconstruction plans. They were kind of similar to Lincoln's. But they were later dubbed the 50% plan, is what they called it. And got some slides. There he is right there, Andrew Johnson. Johnson, of course, was from Tennessee. And he originally, if you know about it, he was the only U.S. senator to back the North during the Civil War. He didn't succeed or support the Confederates and all of that. And then what happened was in 1860s, I think 63, I think it was, he was made the military governor of Tennessee. And then when Lincoln ran for re-election in 1864, he became eventually Lincoln's vice president. So you can see there he was really more pro-Southern. So he more represented the aristocracy. Although you really want to know the truth about Andrew Johnson, he didn't really like the Southern planters like you think. He did own some slaves, but he didn't really like them, support them. He obviously kind of was a white supremacist somewhat. Now he had his own plan, which they often call it, which I'll put on the screen, which is often called the, I'll put it up here for you, but it was called the 50% plan. I'll just spell it out like that for you. And that's what a lot of people dubbed it, the 50% plan. Usually sometimes spelled out, basically. So Lincoln had his 10% plan. He had his 50% plan. What do they mean by that? Well, what he wanted was he wanted 50% of the voters in each state to take an oath to the Union, like all the voters, like half of them at least. So it wasn't like Lincoln wanting to have the people do it in 1860. It's all the people that were there now. That probably made more sense because probably a lot of people got killed during the war or whatever. But so basically half of them is all they needed, basically. You can see also there that no pardons for Confederate leaders. So Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, they couldn't be pardoned. Basically, you owned like at least $20,000 worth of property. You couldn't also be pardoned. It made Confederate states with appointed governors who, of course, established voting procedures. And so that was another thing, too. And they had to abolish slavery, which, if you know about that, that, of course, was what we call the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment abolished slavery, basically. Lincoln had, written up that Emancipation Proclamation, but that wasn't really legal, per se. They had to have some kind of amendment. And so by December 1865, all the states ratified it. And so slavery was banned in the United States. You can see here later, they also came up with two other amendments later during Reconstruction. 14th Amendment, which basically gave African Americans citizenship, is what it did. Then the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote, not women, though. Sorry, but just men. So, so that's later when they passed those in the 1860s. And that go out again? Oh, no, it didn't. But let's talk about also the issues of Reconstruction. That's another thing, of course, that was a big problem with when the Civil War ended, the South was totally destroyed. Homes were burned, buildings burned down, a lot of widows, a lot of orphans, businesses were closed, a lot of properties were abandoned, a lot of land was abandoned, the railroads were tore up, and all that. African Americans, of course, were freed. They were emancipated from slavery. Of course, at the time, they didn't have any citizenship because the 14th Amendment hadn't been passed yet at that point. They didn't have a way to make a living either because a lot of them were slaves. They may have had a skill or whatever, but a lot of them didn't really have a job. Some tried to go to the North as well. And so the federal government really struggled between 1865 to probably 67 in trying to figure out how they were going to reconstruct the South overall, which would be like basically 11 southern states overall. Of course, you see down there, they would also have to try to rebuild the South's ruined economy, which we'll talk about that later, how they do that, and also promote the rights of former slaves will be the other thing that they're going to do also as well. Now, one of the big things, if you know about it, the radical Republicans were involved in, of course, they created a lot of legislation that led to Reconstruction of the South. One of the big things they first developed, if you know about it, was what they call the Freedmen's Bureau, which was formed in March of 1865. The full name was actually called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, and it was considered one of the first type of welfare agencies to aid people. Didn't just aid like African Americans that were freed, but it also refugees and I think also widows, and helped out widows and orphans, and dealt with abandoned lands and things like that. It also set up a lot of schools, like colleges and universities throughout the North and South. And the guy that headed it up and founded it, if you know about it, was famous General Oliver O. Howard, who was at Gettysburg. And he established it, built a lot of schools. And if you know about it, he founded a very famous university in the Northeast, which was Howard University, considered one of the first traditional black college or universities. It eventually taught at least an estimated 200,000 African Americans how to read, because a lot of them were illiterate, and couldn't read and write, going back to the Civil War and before, by 1870. So that's basically what the Freedmen's Bureau mostly was, and Howard was the guy that helped run it for a couple years. Then, of course, the other thing that happened that was kind of controversial, if you know about it, was a lot of the southern states, when they were trying to get back into the Union, they created a bunch of these laws that were called the Black Codes. You may have heard about them. And these were codes that were created to try to control a lot of the freed African Americans. I think especially they were trying to control them because they wanted to control them for labor, because they were going to have to pay them like paid labor after that, because they weren't slaves anymore. And so a lot of states began passing a lot of like laws like this, and they weren't that much different from like a lot of the slave codes that were there going back to the Civil War and the antebellum period. And in fact, Mississippi just took out the word slave and they put black, basically. Seriously, it was like they hardly changed anything with it. Well, they used the word Negro back then, which is just Spanish for black in those days. But so the black codes, like examples of some stuff it did, they could not own property. Was one thing they were trying to push, or own guns. They couldn't have any voting rights. If no job, they could be arrested and forced to work for no pay. So they had just things like this. They came up with, and they only were around like a short time, 1865 to 66. And of course, Congress stepped in and banned them. And so they passed a bunch of, that's part of why they passed those amendments, like the 14th, 15th Amendment, which made them a citizen and also gave, men right to vote. And so that was a way to kind of end those kind of codes at that point. So that's kind of stuff they did. And then, of course, the other thing that happened too, which is very famous, if you know about it. I don't have it in there, but in I think it's 66, I believe it was, the Southern Democrats tried to take their seats in Congress, and they were blocked by the Republicans, refused to let them, take their seat. And eventually, what happened was the radical Republicans are going to take over. So they're going to start controlling Reconstruction. What is called either radical Reconstruction or military Reconstruction will eventually follow. So I think we've covered most of the topics that are right here, I think, as a whole. And I already talked about the two radical Republican theories, state suicide versus conquered provinces, basically, that Sumner and Stevens kind of began pushing in all that. And so let me go ahead and review real quick, and I'll kind of open up for any kind of questions or comments that you have. I'm not going to finish Reconstruction. We'll do that next week. But like I said, the study guide review, we talked about Andrew Johnson, the 17th president of the United States. Remember, he became president when Lincoln was assassinated April 15th, when he died, 1865. I told you Andrew Johnson was a pro-Southern Democrat who wanted to control Reconstruction, and he came up with his own plan, which was called the 50% plan, which I told you was a deal where basically 50% of the voters had to take an oath to the Union for a state to re-enter. And it actually banned, certain Confederates that were high up, like Jefferson Davis or Robert E. Lee, and it also repudiated people's debts. So basically, if you had any property or debts that were expensive or whatever, it was repudiated. And then, of course, the radical Republicans, I told you, actually 1865 is when it was, they barred a lot of the Southern delegates from coming in, really for 1866, really, for coming in. So they get barred eventually, like I told you. So all those delegates, and that was because of the black codes. They had a lot to do with it. And I told you about the Freedmen's Bureau. That was that welfare bureau that Oliver Otis Howard helped run to help out freed African Americans after the war, and also to help out refugees, widows, orphans, etc., to recover after the war, like give them aid and so on. Then I'll tell you about the Black Codes. The Black Codes were these strict laws that the southern states tried to put on freed African Americans to control them, because they wanted to use them as paid labor. They also were trying to prevent them from having civil rights, the right to vote, to own property, to own guns, or even gather as a group. And so that's part of why a lot of the northern, like Republicans, basically rejected them, the southern senators, when they tried to take their seats in Congress. And lastly, I just talked about already the two main radical Republican theories on the bottom there. You see the state suicide argument, the idea that the southern states had committed suicide when they had succeeded from the Union. So that meant they're now territories, right? Is what one theory was. And then they had another theory where conquered provinces argument, that they had been conquered by the North because they lost the war. And so that meant that Congress should control Reconstruction and not the president. And so I'm going to get to it Tuesday next week. I think it's Tuesday. What is that, the 25th, I think? Yeah, Tuesday, 25th. I will, of course, talk about military reconstruction that's upcoming. So we'll get into that later. And Tuesday next week, I'll probably have some kind of Canvas quiz that I'm going to have, for reviewing this whole material that we're covering right now this week and part of next week. So anyway, that's pretty much it for the lecture and review. So does anybody have any questions so far about what I've discussed today about Reconstruction and, of course, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln? If anybody has any questions, you want to unmute your mic, you can, or I can do it.
Okay, I have a question. Is this video going to be saved, or are you going to give us the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I can send you that if you want. You want the PowerPoint? I can put it up. I'll put it up. I'm kind of revising it right now, but yeah, I can put it up for you if you want. Yeah, sure, no problem with that. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody on YouTube have a question? You can always send me a chat, so no questions. Now, don't forget that you can send me comments or questions through YouTube if you have any questions about the lecture. And I think you get +2 points for whatever kind of comment you make, positive, negative, and then also for any kind of questions you can come up with. If you want to ask me about the lecture, that's fine as well. So before we go, don't forget, I told you we have some stuff coming up that's due tomorrow. If you haven't finished the Canvas, the pretest, get that done. So that's going to expire tomorrow night. Also, don't forget to send me, what you're going to do on your research paper topic. You want to do the Veterans Oral History Project. And the student contract policy page, send me that too as well. And that's about it. So Tuesday next week we'll continue with Reconstruction, and then I think after that I'm going to also talk about the Gilded Age in American history. But we will have a Canvas quiz coming up Tuesday, which I'll talk about more later. Okay, so y'all have a good weekend coming up. So y'all take care. So I'll see y'all later. So let me know if you have a comment or some question, okay?